So the first interview call that we got on with YC before we actually got in, the first thing they told us was, you guys are great, but this idea sucks. Your company is headed to the graveyard. You're never going to make it. What's next? So that's the first question they asked us. And we started panicking.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of Inkle's Founder Files. I'm Ananya, this is Dhanraj, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Akash. He's the co-founder and CEO of Clueso. Today we're going to understand a little more about how they built Clueso, Akash's journey, and what's in store for the future. Let's kick off. Akash, would you like to introduce yourself, Clueso? Tell us a little more about what you've been doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm Akash. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Clueso. At Clueso, we're building the fastest way for software companies to create product videos as well as documentation for their products,
Right.
whether it's for marketing or for customer education. How Clueso works essentially is our product transforms rough, ordinary screen recordings of your product into very high quality studio style videos with professional voiceovers, your company branding, music, and everything that you would hope or you would think about achieving with the full designer and going through the entire process, you can do with a click of a few buttons on Clueso.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. A little research has told us that you met your co founders at IIT Madras when you all were studying there. And initially, your idea was not the idea it is today. What was the journey like at IIT Madras and how you came to the idea of Clueso?
So me and my two co-founders are Prajwal and Neil. The three of us met at IIT Madras. The environment was pretty electric in terms of everyone was just trying to tinker, build something new. So in IITM, we have this lab called CFI, where essentially all of the undergrad students who are interested in technology come together and essentially work together on building products. That's where all of us started our journeys as well. Our entrepreneurial journey in particular started during the pandemic in COVID when we were all sent home. What kind of happened was we just had so much free time on our hands. We didn't know what to do with it. There were no extracurriculars, there was no sports, there was no essentially hanging out with friends. So we were like, hey, why don't we start a company? We were also very actively watching Shark Tank at the time. And yeah, so all of us, in fact, we had two more co founders at the time, Abhinav and Gaurav. So all of us essentially got together and we were like, let's start a company. And we were students. We didn't really know anything about the business world or companies or the challenges that people are facing in the professional world. So we're like, hey, why don't we start something that solves a problem that we as students face?
Correct.
And the big problem we were all facing during the COVID pandemic was we were finding it really difficult to collaborate with our professors, collaborate with other students. Group studies used to be super common when we were studying in person at IITM, which completely went away during the pandemic. So we built this tool called Desklamp, which was essentially a tool to help students collaborate, make notes, and study together online. You could think of it as a combination of Google Docs plus Adobe Acrobat, where you read all of your PDFs, but have the collaborative power of Google Docs where you can make notes and share ideas with each other. So that's what we built during college. And then throughout the rest of our years at IITM, this is what we were focused on. And we scaled this to as many users as we could while we were in college.
The transition from Desklamp to what Clueso is today also came through applying to YC. What were you guys thinking of at that time as college students? What were you envisioning Desklamp or Clueso to grow into?
So when we applied to IC, we were in our final year essentially. We had 2 semesters left of college to go to, just the end of our third year.
Right.
At the time, we were totally committed to Desklamp. We really loved the process of building, the process of actually seeing users use what we were building. And a lot of our users were in IITM itself. They were in the library studying with Desklamp.
Right.
We would just walk around and see everyone's kind of using Desklamp and we'd feel really good. So
Okay.
seeing all of this, we were like, you know what? We don't want to sit for placements. We don't want to go for higher studies. So that's when we decided, hey, let's do this full time and build this company out together. Once we made that decision, one of the stark realities that kind of hit us was once we graduate, we need to generate some revenue.
Right.
Desklamp was a free tool. We need to pay ourselves some salary, otherwise our parents are going to come running behind us and ask us what we're doing. So we did need to raise some funds. And we just got started through the process of looking for some investors potentially. We were here in India. We were looking to build the company from India itself. That's when, on a whim, we just applied to YC because one of our good friends, Raghav, who's also a startup founder, told us about YC, and he kind of mentioned that you guys match the team that they're looking for. You're very technical. You don't know anything about business. We had 20,000 users at the time and $0 in revenue.
Whoa.
So we applied to YC. And it was actually once we went to San Francisco, got a bigger picture of how industries work, that's when we essentially realized that we needed to move away from what we were doing at Desklamp and start working on Clueso, which is a whole other story and like process of its own.
But building something with your friends, coming to that, how has it been starting a company with your friends and now working together as co founders? What has changed?
That relationship has definitely evolved a lot from when we initially started to where we are today. When we first started Clueso, or at that time it was Desklamp, we didn't really know each other that well. And in fact, to be even more honest, we didn't know anything in general. Like, we didn't know how to code, we didn't know how to design, we didn't know how to sell, we didn't know any of the things that are required essentially to build a company. And so we didn't know who is supposed to be in charge of what role,
Right.
essentially. Who's going to be building the product? Who's going to be selling it? Nothing was clear. So all of us were doing everything. And we were always like at each other's end, kind of disagreeing. This button looks really ugly. Let's put it over here. Somebody else would want it somewhere else. When someone was doing a customer pitch, like the other two of us would have a lot of inputs. No, you should have said this. Over the course of the journey, we've kind of discovered who's good at what.
Okay.
So I primarily now work on design, I work on front end, I do investor calls and pitch
Okay.
meetings. My co-founder Neil takes all of the sales calls. He works very closely with customers to make sure they're getting the most out of our product.
Nice.
And our third co-founder Prajwal, who's the CTO, he's like a technical wizard. He's in charge of building out the product end to end. So it's become a lot clearer who's supposed to be in charge of what, and we trust each other a lot more when it comes to actually making these decisions. It's not really worth fighting about all the small minute things, because at the end of the day, it's the product that's actually going to make or break your company.
True.
Like, saying some particular words in a pitch meeting or trying to convince a customer one way or the other doesn't really matter if your product is really good and it's doing what it's supposed to do and your customers are achieving.
Yeah, I mean, some really great points. A lot of young founders are always looking to get into YC. We see, I think it's some 30,000 applications each batch, and only, I think, 300 get in, right? That's a really, really small acceptance rate. So, what did you learn when you were at YC?
Our YC journey was totally transformative. When we got into YC, we were a bunch of college kids who knew how to code. When we got out, we had a much larger picture of what is actually required to build a startup. As I mentioned, we applied to YC on a whim. We were just super genuine in our application. We were very straight up in the fact that we don't really have any revenue. We've got a lot of users who are essentially using our product.
Correct.
And that's what they genuinely appreciated from us, in the
Yeah.
sense that they also look for people who are super technical, who know how to build. And the whole YC process essentially is they involve themselves in guiding young technical founders into gaining some business acumen and arriving at an idea that has some potential monetary value. So the big challenge for us at Desklamp was always generating revenue. We never realized that. We thought that growth is everything, get a lot of free users, eventually we'll figure things out, which does eventually work, I guess, for some products. But it doesn't, that's not the case with every product. If you're building a free product, you do need to know at some stage, how are we going to monetize this? So the first interview call that we got on with YC before we actually got in, the first thing they told us was, you guys are great, but this idea sucks. Your company is headed to the graveyard. You're never going to make it. What's next? So that's essentially the first question they asked us. And like, we started panicking. And then I was like, if this doesn't work out, this is another idea we have. I play tennis. So I was like, we'll build this tennis analytics app and we'll tell people whether they're playing well or how they can improve. And I just started rambling all these ideas that were at the back of my head.
Interesting.
And at the end of the call, my co-founder Prajwal was like, what the hell did you just do over there? Like, you are not supposed to say any of those things. What they wanted to hear was, you'll stick with it. You'll actually go through the process. But they actually appreciated that answer, surprisingly. And they were like, they want to have people who are open to trying out new things, who are willing to pivot if the time comes, if the need is there to pivot. That's essentially, even after all of this, once we got into YC, they kept hammering us that you guys need to pivot. Desklamp is not going to work. You're never going to generate any money with Desklamp. We didn't believe them. For an entire month in our YC batch, we were still pushing Desklamp. But after 1 month of pitching to universities in the US, after pitching to college students and not generating any revenue, in fact, we pitched to IIT Madras as well. And they were like, oh, this is great. Maybe you should give it to everyone for free. And that's when we realized we actually did have to pivot.
Right.
And from there, we went to Clueso. So that's the biggest takeaway from YC for us, which is young college founders who didn't really know about anything.
Right.
They helped us transform ourselves into becoming much better at discovering what the actual industry needs and what can actually generate revenue potentially.
Wow.
But Clueso is so far removed from Desklamp. How did you jump from that to this?
Yeah, that's a good question. It wasn't a sudden jump for sure. It was like 1 month of actually deciding that we don't want to do Desklamp in itself was a
Huge decision. Right? Walking away from 20,000 users. Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's like scary, right?
we were scared for a month and then eventually we had to do it.
Yeah.
There was no way forward. Our YC batch was like the clock
Running
was
out,
ticking and we were
right.
running out and we had to get something going because by demo day we did need to generate some
course.
revenue. Finally, we did have to take that decision. And then for another 2 weeks after that, we were exploring new ideas. One great thing about YC is there are so many founders from so many diverse backgrounds.
Right.
There are people who have worked as lawyers, people who have worked as doctors, people who have worked in tech. And we got a chance to speak with all of them. Us being like, we've never worked in a job before. We don't know what companies actually do, how do companies run. So we learned all of this from them. And that kind of gave us a sense of what are the different challenges that companies are facing. And from there, we were actually eventually able to come up with an idea, which is what we're building right now.
Wow.
So we actually faced this problem personally at Desklamp as well. When we were at Desklamp, we used to spend 2 weeks on end actually going to a studio, getting a voice actor to record their voiceover, putting music, and then we would actually animate videos for our product and release it on YouTube. And we did that because every time we released a feature launch video on YouTube, we would see our user base spike by a good amount. We would see conversion from regular users to power users. So these YouTube videos were super important for us. And that would take 2 weeks end to end. We didn't really have a lot of budget to get some designer to work on this full time. So now that we've entered this age where AI has made so many things possible, we thought, why don't we like put together a lot of these capabilities that AI has created and build a tool that can actually automate that entire video production process for software products end to end in a single AI powered product. And from that idea, we eventually landed at what Clueso is today.
Wow.
So you had this idea. Did you have a product or did you first get a customer? Which one came first?
So at Desklamp, it was first product and then customer. And that's another big learning that we got from YC, which is first sell and then build the product. So what we did is we actually created a video of, I essentially first made a design on Figma with a complete end-to-end flow of what Clueso would actually look, feel, and work like. And then recorded a video of like myself going through the process. This is how Clueso works. Sent this video to a few potential customers, and they actually thought that the product was already ready. And that kind of prompted them to get on a call with us.
Okay.
And then from there, we were able to see that there's demand for this product. And once we actually got a customer on board, that's when we essentially started building the product.
Whoa.
It was like they're on board. Now you have to build it.
It's a big kind of misconception that once a customer says they want it, the time it takes for them to actually buy it or start implementing it is at least 1 week minimum for smaller companies. For larger companies, that can go on for months, which is what we've discovered now. So by the time they said yes, we were like, oh shit, we need to build this product out. And then by the next week, we actually had some working prototype of the product ready that they were able to use. So it's not actually like a race against time to get the product out.
Feels
you do
like
have
one-
some
one-
time.
1 week?
You have a week. You have at least a week.
So then you had one customer. Then how many do you have now?
Now we're working with over 200 paid companies who are using Clueso.
Oh my
So
God.
it's been a long journey since that first customer. A lot of things have changed since then. When we were getting our first 10 customers on board, anytime somebody would say, does Clueso do this? We would be like, yes, it does. Even though it doesn't. A lot of things that customers do ask for have already been built because we've been working with them for a long time. The product has shaped with their feedback.
Interesting. When was your biggest oh shit moment as you built Clueso? When did you feel, okay, now we're out of our depth, we got to figure out what's happening and scale or build out these things that would actually make or break the product?
That's a good question. So one, early on, in the very early days of Clueso, we were on top of creating product videos.
Right.
We were also creating in-app tours, essentially. So from the video, we would actually guide a end user of our customer's product to actually go through the steps and click through the buttons on their product. What we realized though is by getting more and more customers, the market or essentially the customer base who's looking to create those in-app tours is very different from the customer base who's looking to create videos. So in particular, it's customer education teams who are looking to create videos and usually product teams who are looking to add those in-app tours in. So at some point we were like, oh shit, this set of customers is like pulling us in one direction. This set of customers is pulling us in some other direction. And it's like this constant battle of tug of war. Where do we want to go?
Go.
So we kind of eventually had to let one set of customers go so that we could put all of our focus on this one direction and essentially add more value to this one set of customers rather than spread ourselves too thin and work with too many people. And
Got it. So your current user base is mostly folks who are building in customer education, right?
yep.
How did you figure out that these are the people we need to target? Like you said, that there are multiple use cases for all of your products. Now, how did you know that this is the one you wanted to focus on and scale this?
I think it sort of organically happens as you're building. If your number one focus as you're building is to acquire more customers rather than to build more features,
Right.
then you will eventually figure out which customer base is working the best. In our case, someone who's in a customer education team, their full-time job is to actually create videos about their product.
Right.
If Clueso doesn't exist, they're going to have to hire a designer and create the videos. Versus some of our other customers who are just like exploring things, they don't know if they want videos or not. So you have to look very closely at what each customer segment is doing. What were they doing before your product existed? What are they doing now that your product does exist? Who's actually using it more actively? Which customer base is essentially more likely to keep using it at a higher frequency. And then you have to be very willing to say no sometimes to customers. It's very hard as a founder, especially because in the early days, it's very important to say yes to
of
everybody.
course.
As you scale and build out your product more, it's important to say no to some people so that you're very focused on one segment and you're building for them.
Wow. It's pretty interesting how you guys have grown from Desklamp to now Clueso to 200 paying customers. What advice would you give younger founders or even college kids like you guys were to actually start up or to even experiment and see that there are options other than the usual corporate job out there?
Yeah, the only advice I would give is if you're looking to start up, definitely start up. There are so many people who I speak to who are college students who tell me they're looking to start up, and then 1 year later, they're like, things didn't work out. I joined this company. So, what I would say is, again, it's all about saying no. Like, very actively, if you want to start a startup, make sure the first and most important thing is to find a co founder. Like, we wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't have the three of us working together. So, find a co founder and be willing to give it a shot for a year. Right. Try it out. If it doesn't work out, I think the worst case scenario is you'll get a job, which is what anyway you're going to do if you don't start the startup. Eventually.
And you've never had a job though, right?
I haven't. Actually, in college, we're supposed to do the 6-month internship. Yeah. That was I did my internship at Desklamp.
Oh.
Okay.
That's pretty. So, one thing I'm actually curious about is a lot of people talk about the differences in the San Francisco or US startup ecosystem and the India ecosystem that's actually building really rapidly. And you've been fortunate to experience both. So tell us about your experience in San Francisco or while you were at YC. What are the learnings that we could take back for the Indian startup ecosystem as well?
I think the Indian startup ecosystem is definitely growing super quickly. Our engineering team is based here in Bangalore,
right.
And we have absolutely no challenges in finding talent. Like, there are so many super talented engineers, designers, marketing folks, like all across the board. Like, there's a lot of talent here in India. One big difference I think that we saw in SF versus in India is that the founders are a lot younger.
Right.
What I am saying though is after graduating, maybe you should give it a shot. Give it a shot for a year.
Right.
The other super encouraging thing that I've seen in India over the last few years is a lot of my seniors from college, after working for a few years at a certain company, they are very actively starting up. So a lot of my seniors are starting up now. So if we can, instead of spending those years and then starting up, if like some people who are super interested in starting up when they're in their final year of college, if we can kind of get the universities to push them to actually start up, that might actually help our ecosystem a lot. Maybe one myth we should probably dispel is that it's not as much of a risk actually starting up.
Yeah.
You actually have a lot more to gain than you risk from that perspective. You do risk stuff by dropping out of college, but I think starting up after you graduate, there's not as much risk as you think. Like, you are working on something that you're passionate about. You are working with your best friends.
Of course.
You're essentially continuing that college environment for a few more months or a year or so.
And you condense a lot of different experiences into that time when you're building. Like, I'm sure you guys never knew what sales was. You had to learn it while you built Clueso, actually actively sell it, and you learned selling while selling.
That's actually a super great point, I think. You discover so many things And in case the startup doesn't work out, you know which one you want to double click on
Correct.
and move into moving
Correct.
forward. I would have never imagined myself being a UI designer, but
Correct.
now I spend pretty much a
A
lot of
lot of
my
time.
time designing UI, UX.
Yeah, I mean, personally, even if I had to start up, at least now I know what I would want to do or what things I like doing and where I need to find a co-founder that sort of complements my skills too. So I think that's great advice for sure. And I'm curious, your first sale that got in money for Clueso, tell us the experience. How did you guys land your first deal?
Yeah, that was a very interesting experience. As I touched upon
Yes,
earlier,
yes.
we did create this Figma mockup and essentially put that out there. So the full story, what happened is we signed up on this SaaS product that we
Okay.
needed to use personally
Okay.
as a company. We signed up onto that product.
Okay.
So there was a help tutorial and a video explaining how to go through the steps. So we watched the video and we were trying to follow along and actually get ourselves onboarded onto that product. But what we realized was that the UI on the product was very different from the UI in the video and the help article that they sent us. Which button are we supposed to click? So we
Right.
sent back an email to them. Hey, this thing doesn't really match what's being shown on the UI. And can we get on a call? And this was actually like the perfect use case for Clueso because
Right.
we're essentially AI powered video and documentation generation. So you don't have to go through a really long process to create a new video once your UI goes out of date. So we pitched our product to them when they finished onboarding us onto their product.
Wow.
He was like, wow, this is crazy. Let me like introduce you to our manager. And then he introduced us to like his manager. We got on a
Right.
call with her.
Okay.
At that point, we had never actually tried to sell anything to anybody. So we'd never actually quoted a price as such. And so we're like, okay, like how do we price this product? And our YC partners were like, $500. And we're like, how did you come up with that? They were like, just say $500.
Just say that.
So we were like, will you pay $500 a month for this? And she was like, no chance. I'm not
Okay.
paying. Then we were like, will you pay $300? She's like, yeah, 300
Maybe.
would work. There was no science to it. That's pretty much all there was.
Wow.
And
I think
then-
you've dispelled a lot of pricing theory.
When you're at the earliest stages, you just want to get to something really
Of
quickly.
course.
You don't want to
Whatever
follow any,
sticks.
That was our first sale.
Last question. What is next for Clueso? What are you excited about? What are you guys thinking of? What's the next big thing for you guys?
Our vision with Clueso essentially is to be that one-stop product for a software company or a SaaS company to essentially go to for all of their video production needs, whether it's training employees across the company with different internal tools, whether it's onboarding or educating their customers on how to use their product, whether it's for creating marketing or feature launch videos. We want to essentially be that one-stop shop where everyone across the SaaS company can essentially create really stunning videos with very minimal effort, no matter who it is. You don't need to be a designer. You don't need to have a super awesome voice or prepare a script or have really good English, none of that stuff. And the other big thing for us is we think one thing that Clueso is really helping a lot of companies do is helping companies around the world really project themselves to their customers across the world.
Right.
So if you're somebody in Europe who's trying to sell to the US, or you're someone in South America who's trying to sell to Asia, we're really helping companies communicate with either their customers or their employees all across the world and project their product in the most professional way possible. Because when we, like, as a really small company, we see the kinds of videos that like Slack and
course.
Dropbox and some of our role models actually create.
Yeah.
And we were like, hey, why can't we create
do
those
that.
kinds of videos? So that's another big motivation. Webflow has the best onboarding / help center videos ever. Really build personality into the videos.
That's true.
Which is what like a lot of people are missing out on.
For sure.
And I think that does add like so much value, as we've seen with Webflow.
Yes. Well,
Big Webflow fans.
Likewise.
okay, I think it's from me. Anything you want to ask Akash before we close?
What are you doing after this?
After
you wanna
this,
hang out?